Well, things are changing so fast that it's hard to think about what the future might look like. But pause for a second and force yourself. What will the world look like in, say, 10 years, 15 years, 50 years? Well, the outlines are pretty clear. If the people who run things, powerful forces, and by that we mean very specifically the U.S. government, the Chinese government, the UN, if they have their way, there will be a lot less private property, a lot less privacy for the average person, and for the average person, a lot of really big decisions will be made not individually, but by machines. So that's clearly the direction we're going. The question is, who wants that? And the answer is very, very few people. That's dystopian, doesn't quite capture it. That's horrifying. That's a nightmare. And so if you had to bring about that future with the consent of the governed, as in a democracy, that would be impossible, because no one will ever want that. It's too ugly and sad. It's clearly anti-human. It's a dead end. So how do you do it? Well, you only have two options. You can use force, just put a gun in people's faces and say, do this, accept this, or I'll kill you. But that's messy and hard, and it requires a lot of guns. It also requires a kind of muscular attitude, an aggression, not just a passive aggression. Probably not going to happen. Or you can do something else. You can make people want it. That's very different from convincing them. There's almost no effort to convince you of anything anymore, in case you haven't noticed. They've totally given up on argument as a means of reaching some kind of mutual consent. It doesn't exist anymore. But they can instead make you want it. Well, how would they do that? Well, the fastest way to do that would be by, say, changing your brain. Is that happening? Well, you have to kind of wonder. What was COVID, by the way? It was the other day, it feels like. We haven't really talked about what that was. It wasn't just some random virus. It probably wasn't even just a lab leak accidentally. This was a bioweapons lab run by the Chinese government, paid for in part by the U.S. government, and it went global. But it really went to the West. That's the truth. To the English-speaking world, to Europe. And it seemed to have changed people. So what's going on here? Is something going on here? And if so, what can you do about it? How do you preserve the sovereignty of your own mind? Maybe that's the most important question. Very few people are thinking about this seriously. Lots of people are speculating about it, but very few scientists are looking at the specifics of how this might be done and what you might do about it. In fact, there's really just one that we're aware of, and we're about to meet him. He is German. His name is Michael Nehls. He's a medical doctor, a physician. He's a molecular geneticist. And he's written what seems to be an amazing new book called The Indoctrinated Brain: How to Successfully Fend Off the Global Attack on Your Mental Freedom. And we are honored to have him join us now. Dr. Nehls, thank you very much.
I'm very honored to be here. Thank you very much. Actually, it honors my work.
Well, and we're honored to have you. So I sort of non-technically and maybe grossly generalized, summarized this idea, but I'd like you to bring some science to it, that maybe COVID, not just the vax, but the virus itself, changed the way people think and feel about themselves and understand themselves. Do you think that's possible?
Yeah, it's absolutely possible. And it was already shown with SARS-CoV-1, the predecessor of SARS-CoV-2.
Yes.
It was published already 2007, 2008, papers which showed that the spike protein itself is capable of doing something which we call neuroinflammation. That means kind of a cytokine storm in the brain. And I've worked on this issue for the last 10 to 15 years, actually published a paper, Unified Theory of Alzheimer's Disease, which is Alzheimer's. Most people think it's the cause is age, but the real cause of Alzheimer's is actually neuroinflammation and our lifestyle. And so the reason age is correlated to it is just because it takes decades to develop disease. But neuroinflammation can be caused by many things. It can be caused by excessive fear, by fear-mongering. Neuroinflammation can be caused by bacteria, by viruses, by infection, chronic infections.
Yes.
So it was shown that in order that the hippocampus, it's our autobiographical memory center, which is the center where Alzheimer's starts, needs to be functional, something which we call adult hippocampal neurogenesis, a permanent production of new nerve cells, which have many, many functions we need to talk about. They are essentially our mental immune system. And if this production is essentially shut down, then our mental immune system breaks down and we are free for everything. I mean, we can be conquered, and we would even accept it. And so I was working on this mental immune system, and
so you're describing a physical,
it's physical.
Exactly, it's physical. This is not emotional. This is not the product of propaganda. You're saying that the way that your brain functions as a physical matter can be changed to make you more controllable.
Emotions essentially change the way the brain works, and strong emotions, fear, for example, particularly in a situation where your mental immune system is down, meaning that your psychological resilience is down. It leads to a very strong effect in the brain, kind of a neurotoxic effect, leakage of molecules out of the neurons, which are recognized by immune cells in the brain. And this recognition leads to an activation of an immune response, a very strong immune response, activating cytokines, pro-inflammatory cytokines, and they attack the hippocampus, our autobiographical memory center, shutting down essentially many, many functions, like, for example, curiosity, like, for example, psychological resilience. It drops, meaning that everything that happens leads to an increased rate of depression. And it shuts down, which I've shown recently and which I've put in my book, it shuts down our ability to think.
You're describing what we're seeing all around us. I have to say, this proves nothing, but I thought it was interesting. I got COVID a couple of years ago, and not the worst sickness I've ever had, but it had the most profound emotional effect for a couple of days. I've never feel depressed. I've never felt that depressed as I did when I had it. I felt defeated. I didn't expect that. I've never heard anybody say that that was a side effect of COVID. Is it?
It is, yeah. So when in 2007, 2008, the first papers came out on how SARS-CoV-1, specifically the spike protein, is able to activate the neuroinflammatory process, shutting down the production of these nerve cells in the hippocampus in our autobiographical memory center, the consequences are clear. In the short term, you are prone to depression. In the long term, you're actually prone to Alzheimer's if you don't change the course of events. Of course, in that time, the spike protein was not, I think, able to actually enter the brain, and they changed that. So when I was actually almost laughing because it was so deeply depressing in a way, so my reaction was kind of funny. I said, when the Nobel Prize was given in 2023 to this mRNA program bringing the spike protein into humans by genetic engineering, the two researchers who got the Nobel Prize actually said in an interview, well, we came up with this idea 15 years ago. So when you look back 15 years ago, it was clear that the spike protein is a bioweapon against the brain, particularly the part of the brain which we call I call our mental immune system, which is the very important part that makes us human, which allows us to think, which allows us to be curious, which allows us to explore the world and develop a culture, everything. So the spike protein essentially attacked humankind, the very basis of humans. Of course, at that time, the spike protein was kind of, not very dangerous because it was an external inflammation outside the brain, which, of course, is transmitted to the brain. That's known. And so we had an indirect neuroinflammation. If you really want to attack the brain, you have to get the spike protein into the brain. That's really dangerous. And so two things happened actually here. So first of all, they changed the SARS-CoV-1 into SARS-CoV-2 by including this furin cleavage site into the spike genome, in the gene of the spike protein. So if you insert this cleavage site, you create essentially a target for a molecular scissor that all our cells have, which we call furin. If furin cleaves the spike protein two halves, we have two subunits, S1 and S2. And the S1 subunit is the outer part, interacts with the same receptor that is also our fear receptor, our danger receptor on the immune cells. And that triggers essentially a cascade of events, which at the end leads to an output of enormous amounts of pro-inflammatory cytokines. Each of them, each individual of them, the whole cascade of different ones, interleukin 1, interleukin 6, TNF-alpha, interleukin 17, whatever, all of them were shown to shut down the production of new nerve cells in the hippocampus, which we require for curiosity, psychological resilience, and our ability to think.
And those are the effects of the vax, of the mRNA vaccine.
Not only the vax, the virus itself.
I think you may be, I mean, it's a lot to take in, but you may be answering the question, why after the mRNA vax was shown not to stop transmission, did governments continue to push it on their populations?
Absolutely. They pushed it even on unborn children, you know, when they,
yes.
Women who are pregnant, young children. So these are all different pieces of a puzzle I couldn't understand. And only when I realized it's not about health, it's not about not even money, it's about conquering the human mind, then it totally made sense suddenly. And all the pieces of the puzzle fell together seamless. And I had a picture in front of me which clearly showed what they are up to. And that is really to undermine the human ability to think. And it's even worse than that. It's even worse than that, which I show in the book. Because we need this production of these new nerve cells, not only for curiosity, psychological resilience, or our ability to think. They are also necessary for memorizing and retrieving new memories. So if you shut down this production and force the hippocampus to memorize all these different stories, these fear-mongering narratives, then these narratives will enter the brain. They will be memorized in the hippocampus, but for a cost. They will override pre-existing memories. There's no other way around it, because you have no production of new nerve cells, allowing new memories formed without harming previous ones. So what happens is you override with the narratives, with the fear narratives, with the technocratic narratives, you override your pre-existing memories, your individuality, or your personality, and change it.
If intentional, this would be the most evil thing ever done.
Absolutely. Absolutely. When I wrote the book, my wife actually is the person who first reads it and corrects it, and she almost got a heart attack doing that. I mean, she had really problems reading chapter by chapter because the evil that the book reveals is traumatic.